when a wild Mustang was born in the middle of a wildfire and had his first tears gently licked away by a sheepdog, no one could have imagined their fates would entwine like brothers. But one day that horse named Blaze was taken away from the ranch, and his canine friend howled in despair. 3 months later, all of America was stunned. A horse had traveled 1,100 miles through forests, across rivers just to find his way back to Cooper. June scorched the high plains of northern Texas with the fury of a furnace. Here, the earth wasn't just dirt, it was a thick red dust, clay-like when wet and rising like cinders when dry. Deep within Palo Duro Canyon, a wildfire had raged for 2 days straight, devouring hundreds of acres of brittle brushland and swallowing what remained of the wild. Ellie Carver pressed her boot to the gas pedal of her worn-down pickup as the radio crackled with urgency. "A pregnant Mustang, trapped near the southern ridge. Fires closing in. Anyone near that area?" She didn't hesitate. Flicking on the rooftop beacon, she turned to Travis Boone, a young man, helping weed near the gates of Red Clay Haven. "Come with me, Travis. Grab the medkit and thermal blankets," Ellie said, her voice sharp, eyes veiling an anxious glint. "We might not be able to save the mother, but if we're quick, we might save the foal." The truck veered off the dirt road, plunging into the canyon pass where red rock walls rose like kiln-fired barricades. The air smelled of scorched grass, and the sound of flames licking through dry branches made the entire scene feel like a tightened bowstring ready to snap. "I've never seen wildfire this close," Travis muttered, trying to keep his voice steady as smoke drifted between the cracks in the stone. "Keep breathing. Don't look at the fire. Look at me," Ellie said, lowering the window to let in a wave of searing heat. "We're here for one fragile life. No one else will get there in time. We're its last shot." When they reached the location, the world looked drained of color. Against a glowing red backdrop, a wild mare coated in ash and sweat was curled beside the stone wall. Her eyes were fogged with exhaustion, her body trembling with contractions. "Oh, God," Travis whispered. "She's going into labor." Ellie didn't reply. She rushed forward, crouching beside the quivering mare, whispering words meant for a soul hovering between life and death. Travis opened the kit, handing her clean cloths, water, and blankets. The fire was still some distance away, but the wind had no loyalty. Time was not on their side. For nearly 20 minutes, the mare writhed until from the mess of blood and dust, a foal slid free. Scrawny, soaked, so limp that Ellie thought it was already gone. But then it breathed. Then again, a tiny, frail sound, barely more than a whimper rose between the wind and flame. On its forehead, a white blaze shaped like a flicker of fire, bold against damp chestnut fur. "Blaze," Ellie whispered, "your name is Blaze because you were born of fire." The mother never rose again. Despite every effort, 5 fluids, shielding tarps, soft coaxing smoke had already burned her lungs, and her strength was gone. In her final breath, she turned to her foal, gaze full of something too human to describe, then collapsed, eyes open but empty. Travis lowered his head. Ellie clenched her blood-stained hands. Then, wordless, she pulled the thickest blanket over the tiny, shivering body and gathered it into her arms. "We have to go, right now," she told Travis, eyes red with grief. "A baby shouldn't die twice in the same night." They fled the canyon, just as the forest behind them exploded into a wall of flame. The truck raced through the dust, into the night, carrying an orphaned soul toward a place Ellie wasn't sure she could keep safe for long. Red Clay Haven, the last wild horse sanctuary left in the eastern Texas panhandle. That night, Blaze lay in a small straw-lined stall. Ellie didn't leave his side, sitting by him like a sleepless mother beside her child's crib. He didn't nurse, but he breathed. His small hiccups sounded like wind nudging through wooden slats, fragile yet defiant. Outside, the wind shifted again, toward red clay, and somewhere in the distance a second pair of eyes watched the stable through a cracked doorway, gray-furred, sharp-eyed, and quietly knowing. Cooper, the ranch's 3-year-old Australian shepherd, had no idea that this night would change his destiny forever. At dawn, the first light of day swept across the rusted tin roof of Red Clay Haven. The air still held the scent of smoke, even though the canyon fire had been halted overnight. The ranch remained silent except for one faint, steady sound. The weak breathing of Blaze, echoing softly from the small stall near the supply barn. Ellie Carver had not left since carrying Blaze home. Throughout the night, she had moved between wiping down his tiny body, heating formula milk, and keeping him warm by bundling him in blankets. Every 2 hours, almost as if an invisible clock was wired into his instinct, Blaze would stir, tilt his head slightly, and emit a soft whimper, asking for milk. His big brown eyes were still drowsy, but whenever they met Ellie's gaze, something flickered in them, a rare glint of awareness. She gently brushed the fur on his forehead, touching the white fire-shaped marking, and whispered, "You're my little warrior." Just then another sound echoed through the quiet, not loud, but enough to make Ellie tense. A soft whine, followed by the scratch of claws against concrete. She turned her head. At the stall's entrance stood Cooper, the salt-and-pepper-furred Australian shepherd. His sharp eyes were locked on Blaze, his ears perked, his tail wagged slowly. "No, Cooper," Ellie said softly, raising her hand. "Blaze is still too weak." But Cooper didn't step in. He just sat at the threshold, head tilted slightly, as if waiting for permission. After a moment he sniffed the air, then gently stepped forward. Blaze, previously still suddenly, opened his eyes and lifted his head in surprise. For a few suspended seconds, it was as if they had known each other all along. Blaze, not even a day old, didn't startle at the sound or scent. He simply reached out and touched his muzzle to Cooper's nose, a gesture so natural that Ellie stood frozen in disbelief. "Oh my God," she breathed. Cooper laid down right beside Blaze. His body curved around the tiny foal's chest and belly. His fur, soft and warm, formed a blanket of its own. Blaze nestled his head into that fur, exhaled, and drifted back to sleep. Ellie didn't stop them. Something deep in her heart told her, "Don't break this bond. Maybe, just maybe, that night's fate hadn't ended in the canyon. Maybe it had only just begun right here." 3 days later, Red Clay Haven felt alive again. Blaze was recovering faster than anyone had expected. Travis Dow, the young man who had gone with Ellie into the fire, now spent most of his mornings sitting near the small stall, notebook in hand, watching and writing. Day 3. Blaze recognizes my voice, but what's amazing is how he reacts to Cooper's sounds. When Cooper barks gently, Blaze stands up. When Cooper whines, Blaze curls into his belly for warmth. Travis paused his writing and looked up. Before him was an unusual sight. Cooper held a small stick in his mouth, swaying it back and forth in front of Blaze. At first, the foal just sniffed at it, unsure. Then Cooper dropped the stick, stepped back, and barked once. Blaze stared at him, then lowered his head, picked up the stick in his mouth, walked a few steps, and dropped it. "No way," Travis laughed. "He's playing fetch?" Ellie walked over just then, coffee in hand. She watched the scene and shook her head. "This little guy thinks he's a dog now," she said. "Or maybe Cooper thinks he's a horse?" Travis replied, blinking. They both burst into laughter. By the second week, the bond between Blaze and Cooper was no longer a surprise at Red Clay had become something folks looked forward to each morning. At exactly 6 a.m., Cooper would trot toward the stall, give a soft bark, and wait patiently by the gate. The moment it creaked open, he'd dash inside like a fired arrow. Blaze would already be waiting, head bowed low, nose to the ground, mimicking a dog's greeting ritual. Then both would bolt out to the grassy field, chasing, circling, playing. For the first time, Ellie Carver saw a foal fall asleep with his muzzle tucked into the belly of a dog. She also saw a sheepdog guard a young Mustang like it was part of his flock. But more importantly, she saw Travis, a boy once abandoned by his parents, once silent enough that people thought he couldn't speak, now laughing, sharing, and every evening whispering, "I'm writing it all down. Someday, people will believe that animals feel just like we do." The first month passed, and Blaze grew fast. His coat shone with health. His frame began to show lean muscle, especially in those strong, slender legs. But one thing never changed: the way he looked at Cooper as a brother. "This horse thinks he's a dog," remarked old vet Harlan Briggs during a routine check. "I've seen dogs nap next to horses, but never a horse nuzzle a dog's tail every time it wags." Ellie chuckled and poured him more tea. "They're family, Doc, even if they don't share the same species." "Family, huh?" Harlan frowned. "Then what's your plan when Blaze comes of age?" "He'll need to run with his kind, not follow a dog his whole life." That question silenced Ellie. She looked toward the stall. Cooper lay sprawled, head on his paws. Blaze lay beside him, resting his head gently on Cooper's back, ears tuned to every breath. In that moment, she couldn't tell which was horse and which was dog. She just saw two beings different in form, in voice, yet beating with the same heart. And Ellie knew the world might not be ready to accept that. But Red Clay Haven was. 3 seasons had passed since Blaze first let out his newborn cry on the red soil of Red Clay Haven. And as if some miracle coursed through his veins, he grew faster than any foal in his age group. His body turned sleek and powerful, muscles strung like cords of fire. His long legs kicked with strength, and his eyes burned with a light that matched his name. But one thing never changed. Blaze still saw Cooper as everything brother, friend, family, and herd. Cooper, now nearing 6 years old, hadn't lost his role as the gentle, firm older sibling. Whenever Blaze got too rowdy, Cooper would let out a particular bark, then nip lightly at his neck or legs, just like he would discipline a wayward sheep. And strangely, Blaze never reacted like a horse. He would step back quietly, lower his head, and tuck his ears like a scolded pup. That strange harmony between them had become something of a living legend around the ranch. Visitors from neighboring towns came to Red Clay on weekends just to watch the Mustang who played fetch or the sheepdog who lounged in the grass with a worn bridle in his mouth, as if walking his younger brother for a stroll. But then the 4th summer rolled in, and with it came questions no one could avoid. Ellie stood at the main paddock fence watching a group of wild horses graze and train for the autumn roundup. Beside her stood old Doc Harlan Briggs, arms crossed, gaze serious. "He's almost 3.5, Ellie," he said, voice lower than usual. "If you want Blaze to have a real future, he needs to learn how to live with his own kind, out there." "You mean join the herd?" "Exactly. We could place him with Samson and Lola's group. They're experienced, low aggression, but it means separating him from the dog." Ellie tightened her grip on the wooden fence. Out in the field, Blaze was cantering in circles alongside Cooper, his front legs lifting high like a circus act. Cooper howled every time the Mustang reared, as if cheering. It was their own made-up dance, a wild duet between two species that never should have understood each other. "You know they've never spent more than one night apart, right?" she whispered. "I do," Harlan said gently. "But you also know a horse can't live his whole life in a stall thinking a dog is his herd. Blaze needs to know who he is." His words struck Ellie like a silent punch. Deep down, she knew he was right, but her heart screamed in protest. A week later, they tried introducing Blaze to the herd. It was a still morning, no wind, no clouds. Cooper was kept inside the barn. Blaze was led into the main paddock, where 8 other wild horses grazed lazily. At first, it seemed okay. Blaze walked slowly, sniffing the grass, the soil, even the fresh dung. But when a dominant stallion approached, trying to sniff his flank, Blaze panicked. He neighed in confusion and tore across the corral, calling out with a sound that wasn't quite a whinny and not quite a bark. Something caught between 2 worlds. He galloped in circles, searching for an escape, eyes wide, hooves slipping on damp grass. From inside the barn, Cooper howled. "Stop!" Ellie shouted. "Open the gate." Travis sprinted, unlatched the iron gate. Blaze bolted out like a shot, ran straight to his old stall, and pressed his head against Cooper's door. Cooper, just released, ran up and touched his nose to Blaze. And the 2 of them stood there, breathless, silent. It was the first time Ellie saw Blaze cry. A single tear slid from his left eye, not from pain but from something deeper. A wound without words. After 3 failed attempts, Ellie gave up. She built a separate paddock smaller than the main pasture, but bigger than the old stall. It had its own path, shaded trees, and most importantly, a dog-sized door from the barn that led straight into the grassy enclosure. Now Cooper could come and go as he pleased. And Blaze, though no longer running with the herd, was no longer confined by walls. Peace returned, but only for a while. "Ms. Carver?" The voice came from the main gate one quiet afternoon. Ellie looked up. A shiny black SUV idled at the entrance. The man who stepped out wore a suit and leather boots, but had the calm poise of an old cowboy. That's how Ellie would describe him later. He introduced himself. "My name is Wyatt Langley. I run the Equine Therapy Initiative in Colorado Springs. I'm here for your horse." Ellie frowned. "We don't sell horses." "I'm not here to buy," he replied. "I'd like to partner." He handed her a proposal. Red Clay would receive a grant big enough to operate for 3 full years. In return, Blaze would be transferred to Colorado, where he would join a therapy program for autistic children and veterans with PTSD. It was a chance for Blaze to live in a better-equipped facility, one where he could become a symbol of nonverbal connection. Ellie read the document, her heart sinking. She knew Red Clay was running out of money. Maintaining the ranch, feeding dozens of rescue horses, paying staff, settling hay debts. It was all weighing her down. But what about Cooper? And Blaze, how would he live without his brother? She asked for one night to think. That night, Ellie sat alone on the porch. Beside her was Travis, gently scratching Cooper's neck. "If you send Blaze away, Cooper will know," Travis said quietly. "I know," Ellie replied, "but you also know. If you don't, this place might shut down, and the others won't have anywhere to go." Ellie nodded, eyes stinging. "I just don't know how to explain it to them." The next morning, a transport truck from Colorado Springs parked outside the ranch. Cooper watched from a distance, tail down, eyes locked on the unfamiliar steel trailer. Blaze was let out. He didn't resist, but he didn't walk fast either. Each step looked like he was treading on broken wood. When he reached the ramp, Blaze paused. He turned and looked at Cooper. Cooper barked just once, a short bark, the same signal he always gave when they played tag, when Blaze was just catching up. Blaze stepped into the trailer. As the door shut, Cooper lunged. He jumped, clawed, howled, not because he was left behind, but as if he was trying to shake the whole world into realizing something was wrong. And Blaze inside the trailer let out a broken snort. It wasn't a whinny, it wasn't a bark, it was the choking cry of a creature who didn't know what he was, only that half of him was being torn away. Blaze arrived in Colorado beneath a dim, overcast sky. The cold crept down from the mountain ridges, sinking deep into the pine-scented planks of the barnyard. Aspen Ridge Equine Therapy Center was a modern, sprawling facility, open stalls, lush green pastures stretching toward the evergreens, housing for special needs children and returning veterans. Everything was pristine, calm, quiet. But inside that quiet, Blaze could not breathe. The Mustang, who once ran like wildfire across Texas, now stood as still as a statue. Each morning, handlers led him to the training grounds, hoping he would adjust to new companions, but Blaze showed no interest in the other horses. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't look anyone in the eye. He paced in his stall, rubbing his nose raw against wooden beams, letting out that same confused sound. Somewhere between a whinny and a bark, a sound that seemed to claw out from deep inside him. The center's vet examined him. No physical illness, no injury, but Blaze had dropped nearly 70 pounds in 10 days. His coat dulled, his eyes hollowed. In a report sent back to Red Clay, Mr. Langley wrote, "He avoids the other horses, doesn't respond to lead cues, no bonding with caretakers, and every night he makes a sound that resembles a broken bark. I believe he's calling someone named Cooper." Back in Texas, rain had fallen for 3 straight days. Flash floods from canyon tributaries forced Red Clay to evacuate 12 horses to higher ground. Ellie and Travis worked nonstop bundling hay, tying down feed sheds, moving equipment into temporary shelter. But something hung heavy in the air. A silence. A name no one dared speak. Cooper had not eaten a full meal since Blaze left. At first, he lay inside Blaze's old stall, refusing to go outside, skipping patrol, ignoring fetch. Ellie had to coax him out to relieve himself. She spoon-fed him, begged him. There were moments when he seemed to be getting better until someone mentioned Blaze's name. Then Cooper would growl softly, turn his head, and bury his face in the corner of the wall. One evening, Travis brought in Blaze's old bridle, the one they used to play tug with, and gently laid it beside Cooper. The dog sniffed it, then lay down, resting his chin on the leather strap like a child hugging his brother's shirt. 2 months after the separation, Texas was drenched in storms. A rare spring downpour lasted 5 nights, washing out the main roads leading to Red Clay. The power went out. Phones went silent. Ellie and the staff relocated all livestock and supplies to an improvised shelter on the forest-edge wooden planks, tarp roofs, held together with rope and hope, and Cooper vanished. The last anyone saw of him, Ellie had stepped outside during thunder, calling Blaze's name out of sheer habit. Cooper stood in the middle of the field, facing east toward the creek that had once been a calm stream, now a roaring beast. The next morning, he was gone. Ellie searched the ridge, calling until her voice cracked. Travis climbed every trail, waving his jacket like a flag. But all they heard were the roaring waters, the slapping rain, and the hammering of their own frantic hearts. "Maybe he followed a scent," Harlan said quietly. "Or worse, maybe he got swept away." Ellie didn't answer. But that night, after everyone had gone inside the tent, she sat alone beneath the canopy, holding the bridle Cooper once wore, staring into the pitch-black woods. "If you're alive, you'll find the way back," she whispered. "I believe that." In Colorado, skies weren't any kinder. Mountain winds dragged fog and bitter cold through the ridges. Blaze was becoming erratic. He refused to return to his stall at night. He broke fences, ran wild through the hill trails. Once he slammed into the rear gate so hard that the frame splintered. It took staff nearly 3 hours to bring him back. Langley called Red Clay in alarm. "I think we made a mistake. I've never seen a horse lose his soul this quickly." In the barn, Blaze stood each night beside a specific plank wall, the one he'd first rubbed his nose against. Now he stood silently, snorted once, paused, and again, like a code repeating into the void. A call no one answered. "We need to bring him back," Ellie said firmly during a late-night emergency meeting at Red Clay. The backup generator had just brought the landline online for a few minutes. "But the roads are all blocked," Travis protested. "Even the Jeep can't get through. How are you planning to haul a horse?" "I'm not hauling," Ellie said, biting her lip. "We find another way. Or we let him find it." "What are you saying?" "I believe Blaze will know." That same night, beneath a sky howling with wind and half-covered moonlight, Blaze broke out of the ranch one last time. No one saw him go. A night watchman later reported a loud crash near the western paddock around 3 a.m. When he arrived, nothing. No rope, no fight, no blood. Only hoof prints. Heading southwest. 7 days later, the first sighting came in from Eagle Nest, New Mexico. A chestnut Mustang with a white blaze shaped like fire was seen crossing a highway at dawn, silent as a shadow. Then came Las Vegas, not the city, but the ghost town by the National Forest, where a trucker snapped a blurry phone photo of a horse by the river staring into the sunset. At Red Clay, Ellie heard the report via local radio. Her heart raced like a coming storm. Travis held the photo and whispered, "He's not coming home to the ranch. He's looking for Cooper." News of a lone Mustang crossing highways, moving steadily through open grasslands and riverbeds as if on a mission, began to spread across the rural Southwest. In horseback riding forums, rescue networks, and equine communities, people shared a grainy photo of a chestnut Mustang with a blaze-shaped marking on his forehead seen traveling alone from inland Colorado all the way toward the hills of Oklahoma. "This isn't a wild horse," wrote a rancher in Amarillo. "He didn't bolt when I approached, didn't neigh. He just looked at me, then turned west, like he was looking for someone." Ellie printed that photo and pinned it to the bulletin board at Red Clay's temporary shelter. She used red tacks to mark every reported sighting. One red dot to the next formed a diagonal line starting from the Colorado Therapy Center, trailing all the way toward the eastern edge of Texas. "Told you," Travis murmured. "Blaze isn't coming back to us. He's looking for Cooper." That morning, Travis woke early and pulled on his muddy boots. He stepped into the yard, still soggy after weeks of rain, and reached into his pocket for a thin cloth. It was one Cooper used to drag around the ranch, from stall to pasture. Travis laid it gently near the wooden gate. "If he makes it home," he said to Ellie, "at least Cooper will know he didn't lose the trail." Meanwhile, on a windswept hill near the New Mexico border, Blaze kept moving. He didn't graze long in any field. Didn't drink at any stream for more than a few minutes. Didn't sleep for more than an hour at a time. His eyes dark, deep, heavy weren't from hunger, but from longing. Longing for something he didn't have a name for. Something he could only try to summon with a soft, broken snort whenever he heard a bark in the distance or smelled damp hay in the fog. In every town he passed, people left fresh water, hay, and small signs carved in wood. Let him keep going. Local news channels picked up the story. They called him Blaze the Wanderer. A regional television anchor broadcast, "A Mustang has traveled over 1,100 miles across state lines, mountains, and rivers." In what appears to be a quest not for survival, but for someone he calls family. One viewer wrote into the newspaper, "We say animals don't feel like we do, but I'd bet my life there are humans who wouldn't be half as loyal as this horse." On the 17th night since Blaze left Colorado, a wildlife camera on the west edge of Arkansas captured a chilling image. Blaze crossing an old railway bridge above a surging red creek. The wind howled in the footage, but Blaze moved forward slow, precise as if remembering every gap between the boards. Locals began to gather along the possible routes. An elderly couple in rural Oklahoma left a lantern by their fence post with a note, "If you pass through here, know this, there's still light showing you the way home." At Red Clay, Ellie got a call early in the morning from a trucker named Howard. "Ms. Carver, I'm not sure, but I think your horse, he's coming back." "Can you hold him?" Ellie asked, heart hammering. "No, ma'am, I don't think I should. He looks like he knows what he's doing better than I ever will." At that same time, Travis was mapping out Blaze's route in his notebook, eyes scanning a printed Google map. He circled an area in northeastern Briscoe County where floods had recently wiped out the roads. "Ellie," he called, "if I were Blaze, I wouldn't come back through the main road. I'd go through the canyon, the place where Cooper disappeared." Ellie went still. She stared at the map, then toward the distant ridge, still scarred and jagged from the storm. "He's not looking for home," she repeated softly. "He's looking for Cooper. Night 24. The wind blew colder than usual. The moon, half veiled behind heavy clouds, still cast just enough light for Ellie to see a lone silhouette standing on the rocky slope, a figure unmoving, worn but intact. "Blaze," she called softly, barely above a breath. The horse turned his head. His ears flicked forward, but he didn't move closer. He let out a long, broken snort, then turned away. "No, not here," Ellie murmured. "He's still searching." She followed him, stepping along the narrow path that led down the eastern ravine, the one the floods had once swallowed whole. The ground was littered with broken rock and dead limbs, bleached like bones. Blaze slowed, then stopped near a patch of jagged dirt. He snorted again, this time faster, sharper. 1, 2... 3 seconds later, a weak bark echoed from below. "Cooper!" Ellie screamed, voice cracking. She rushed to the ledge, heart nearly bursting. Down below, 20 feet into the ravine, on a narrow shelf of rock, lay Cooper. His fur was matted, one leg hung limp, his eyes barely opened. But when he heard Ellie's voice, his tail wagged, slow but unmistakable. Blaze let out a sound that shook the trees. It wasn't a neigh, it wasn't a bark, it was a call from a heart that had traveled over 1,000 miles just to hear that familiar breath one more time. Cooper was alive. That night all of Red Clay held its breath. News that Cooper was alive, trapped on a narrow ledge 20 feet down the eastern ravine, spread like lightning. Ellie stood at the edge of the cliff, flashlight cutting through the darkness toward the jagged rocks below, where the land had crumbled after the floods. Down there, Cooper lay trembling, skin pulled tight over bone, breathing fast. He had been missing nearly 2 weeks. "I can't believe it," Ellie whispered, tears slipping freely. "You're alive. You really made it." Beside her, Blaze paced relentlessly near the cliff's edge. His ears were rigid, eyes wide and locked on the shape below. Every time Cooper stirred, Blaze stomped the ground or tilted his head, pleading, "I'm here. I'm not leaving." "We have to get him up now," Travis said, running over with a headlamp and a backpack full of rope. "The ground's unstable," Doc Harlan warned, peering through binoculars. "One falling rock, and that shelf could collapse." "And Max—" He hesitated, his voice rough. "Max won't last till morning." "Call a chopper," Travis suggested, "like we did with Lucky." "Nearest bird's 3 hours out," Ellie replied. "Max doesn't have 3 hours." "Then we go down," Travis said firmly. "No one's climbing that ravine," Harlan growled. "I'm the only tendon repair surgeon left on this land, and I'm not letting anyone die over an emotional gamble." Silence followed, only Blaze moved, scraping the hard ground with his front hoof. Then he turned his head slowly toward Ellie and let out a low, rumbling nicker. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't fearful. It was an offer. Ellie stepped closer, hand on Blaze's neck. "You want to go down?" she asked gently. "You think you can?" Blaze didn't flinch. He stepped forward, touched the cliff's edge with his hoof, then backed up and stomped once, marking the anchor point. "Ellie," Travis whispered, "I think he knows what he's doing." "What?" Harlan snapped. "You're going to tie a rescue rope to a horse? This isn't a movie." "No," Ellie said, turning to him, eyes red. "This is real life. It's what Max and Blaze have kept each other alive for, 3 years and counting. If Blaze hadn't brought us here, Max would already be gone. And if I don't let him do this now, then maybe I was never worthy of keeping this sanctuary alive. Harlan didn't speak again. He just stared at the ground. 15 minutes later, a makeshift rescue unit was assembled. Blaze was fitted with a custom sling harness, secured around his chest and shoulders. Not a traditional saddle, but a specially modified load-bearing rig used in rare equine extractions. A second rope was anchored to an old oak tree above the ravine, attached to a pulley system. "We'll lower someone down first," Ellie explained, hand on the rope. "They'll secure Max in a soft cradle. Blaze will hold tension from above the entire time." "You sure about this?" Travis asked under his breath. "I've never been more sure." The one chosen to descend was Ben, a tall, lean volunteer and former Army Ranger, familiar with high-angle rescues. He strapped on a headlamp, grabbed the vet kit and canine rescue sling, and approached Blaze. "All right, soldier," Ben said, patting Blaze's neck. "Tonight, I'm trusting my life to you." Blaze only snorted quiet, and focused eyes locked on the darkness below. "Tension set, steady," Ellie murmured, one hand gripping the rope, the other on Blaze's spine. "Ben ready?" "Ready. Lower him." For 15 whole minutes, Blaze stood perfectly still. No tossing, no tail twitch, no shifting weight. Every time the rope tightened, Blaze leaned gently backward, centering his strength at the anchor point. When a pebble slipped and tumbled into the void, he flinched, but didn't move. Ben reached the ledge. He crawled along the rock, reaching the motionless Cooper. In the roaring wind, he slipped the cradle beneath the dog, checked his vitals, then raised one fist in the air. "Pull!" "Blaze, back one step," Ellie commanded. Blaze responded. He stepped back. Just once, tension tightening on the rope. Slowly, gently, the cradle began to rise. Inches at a time, Cooper's frail body hovered over jagged rock. Ellie stopped breathing. Harlan gripped the line so tightly his knuckles turned white. Then finally, Cooper's paws cleared the ledge. His body came into the light. The moment he was safe. Blaze let out a sound that shook the sky. Not a whinny, not a bark, but a howl deep, guttural, almost human. It was the echo of a memory. The voice Cooper once taught him now returned. Cooper was laid gently onto a blanket in the emergency tent. The ranch vet worked quickly. Extreme dehydration, 2 broken ribs, lacerations on the hind leg. But reflexes were intact. "He's got a chance," the vet said. "Not a big one, but he's still in the fight." Ellie knelt beside him. Blaze approached, no command needed. He lowered his head and pressed his muzzle to Cooper's forehead. Cooper shivered softly, then exhaled one long, breath-like answering. And for a heartbeat. The entire ranch went quiet. 6 hours later, dawn broke. Cooper was still alive, still wrapped in blankets, but conscious. He drank water. Travis placed a faded red rubber ball, his old favorite, beside him. Cooper nudged it once with his nose, pushed it lightly, then closed his eyes again. Outside the tent, Blaze stood guard. He never blinked, never stepped away. Ellie placed a hand on Travis's shoulder. "We owe him more than we can repay," she whispered. Travis nodded, eyes locked on the horse outside. "It wasn't Blaze who saved Max," he said. "It was their love. Love that wouldn't let either of them be left behind." 3 months after the rescue, summer had bowed gently to the crisp breath of early fall across the red earth of the Texas Panhandle. On the slopes around Red Clay Haven, the grass glowed golden in the soft light, and the air, once heavy with smoke and fear, now carried the scent of fresh hay, damp pine, and something deeper: renewal. And at the center of that renewal were 2 creatures who didn't belong anywhere but together: Blaze and Cooper. It took Cooper nearly 6 weeks to fully recover. During that time, Blaze never left the medical tent. At night, he would lie beside the canvas window, long neck curved inward, just enough for his nose to brush against Cooper's head whenever the dog shifted restlessly. By day, he patrolled the perimeter like a silent sentinel, neighing sharply if any stranger got too close without food or medicine. At one point, even old Doc Harlan Ever the skeptic chuckled and said, "That horse is practically a nurse. He reminds me when it's time for Cooper's injections. Same time, same place, never off by a minute." The day Cooper walked again slow, limping but upright, the whole ranch erupted like they'd won a national championship. Ellie wept in the middle of the field. Travis screamed and dropped to his knees, covering his face. And Blaze? Blaze reared onto his front legs, tail flicking, letting out a long, thunderous whinny, a dance only brothers could understand. That same afternoon, Ellie received a long email from Wyatt Langley, the man who once took Blaze to Colorado. "I don't regret trying, but I understand now. Blaze isn't just a horse, and Cooper isn't just a dog. They're family of a kind we don't have the vocabulary to explain." Attached was a formal document, full transfer of ownership of Blaze back to Red Clay Haven, along with a long-term grant to create a permanent space dedicated solely to Blaze and Cooper. 3 weeks later, the Blaze Cooper Sanctuary opening ceremony was held. Over 300 guests came from across the southern states. Local news stations, animal welfare groups, veterinary students, families who had once brought autistic children to Red Clay All were there. The handcrafted wooden gate bore a single inscription: "The ones who came home to each other." The space featured a 3-acre field, a gentle hillside trail for horses, and a small artificial grass playground, complete with tunnels and ramps designed for both hooves and paws. At the center stood a wooden cabin with 2 doors, one large, one small. Inside were 2 sleeping areas, joined by a straw-lined tunnel where a horse could stretch out and a dog could curl up at his side. "We designed everything based on how Blaze and Cooper live," Ellie said to the crowd. "The way they play, sleep, eat, communicate. It's unlike any bond I've ever seen. So they deserve a space that's unlike anywhere else." The crowd stood still for a long moment. Then applause broke out strong, rolling, washing over the hills like wind. That afternoon, the gates opened. Blaze stepped through, first tall, confident, surveying the new territory like a prairie lord. Cooper followed behind, not hurried, but watchful, eyes never leaving Blaze's side. At the far end of the field, near the eastern fence, Blaze suddenly lowered his head and picked up an old red rubber ball, faded with time. He tapped it toward Cooper. Cooper sniffed, then grabbed it, gave it a soft shake, and dropped it. "This place'll do," he seemed to say. The crowd erupted into laughter. Children shouted. Cameras clicked. Some people just stood with hands over mouths, eyes glistening. The following week, a research team from the University of Texas submitted a proposal. "We request Blaze and Cooper be recognized as the first officially documented case of interspecies social bonding resulting in cross-species communication behavior." Ellie read the file and smiled. "I don't know a thing about all these academic terms," she told Travis, who sat nearby, still adding pages to a now 300-page notebook. "But I know this much: those 2 don't need any institution to tell them they belong together." That night, the northern wind blew gently over the ranch. Inside the sanctuary, a soft yellow lamp cast warm light over the grass. 2 silhouettes, one large, one small A, curled together in the glow. Blaze rested on his side, neck bent like a cradle. Cooper lay nestled against his belly, head tucked over one leg, breathing slow and steady like a pup safe in his mother's den. Outside the window, Ellie stood holding a mug of tea gone cold. Beside her, Harlan lit a cigarette silently. "You know," he said softly, "we spend our whole lives searching for the right people, the right place, the right definition of family. But sometimes Something comes along that no word in our language can explain. Ellie didn't answer. She only nodded. Then the Texas sky opened once more. Rain fell soft, quiet, like a hand reaching out. It washed away the red dust of last season, and in its place carved something lasting. A story, a promise, a family, not by species, not by language, but by heart. If the story of Blaze and Cooper touched your heart, drop a 0 in the comments to let us know you still believe there's such a thing as true kinship between animals and humans. Or if you've ever witnessed a magical friendship between different species, comment 1. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe to True Animal Stories for more unforgettable journeys, where the hearts of animals lead us to the very best parts of being human. See you in the next story.